Good morning, this is Nigel Farage bringing you the latest edition of Phone Farage here on LBC. I'm here for the next 30 minutes taking your calls, and this is your chance to put any question you like to me, and I'll do my best to answer. So the number for you to get involved is 0345 6060 973. And let's go straight to our first caller this morning, who is Matthew in Bristol. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well, thanks.
Excellent. My question is that there's been a lot in the media, and even David Cameron seems to be applying in Parliament a week or so ago, that Boris Johnson's reasons are for leaving the EU are for his own political gains or motives. But I wanted to first ask you what your thoughts are on this. But is it not possible, like he said, in fact, in particular because of the fact that he was deliberating for so long, that he may, yes, it may be an advantage to him, but it may be just the fact that he never really was an outer as such, but he did want to an EU reformed. And when David Cameron came back with hardly anything that was worthwhile, he decided, you know what, actually I am going to promote the outer campaign.
Yeah, I mean, when Boris came out, as it were, in that North London street in a sort of completely chaotic, very Boris-y press conference, I was really pleased that Boris had come to the Leave side of the argument. Why? Because he's one of just a handful of genuinely recognisable politicians in this country, and that makes a big difference. But when he started to speak, I got worried, because he said, we need to vote to leave so that we then get a better deal, and then we can vote again to... I thought, crikey, what's this all about? But by the Thursday of that week, he'd corrected it in an article in the Times, and he'd said, leave means leave, and I've listened to the arguments that Boris has been making for the last few days, and as far as I'm concerned, he's making the right argument. So, Matthew, whether he's doing it because originally he was genuinely convinced of the case, whether he's doing it for his career, whether he's doing it for a bit of both, I don't care. He's on the right side, he's a big hitter, and I think in London and the home counties, he has a real influence over Conservative voters. So I am delighted that Boris is on board. What do you think, Matthew? Are you very cynical about his motives?
No, I have to say I don't think I am. I think, like probably a lot of people, that he genuinely thought that there could be some kind of reform. I know that obviously there were some things that were just never going to happen. But when David Cameron came back with things that I think a lot of people weren't actually that too fussed about anyway, that wasn't the reasons why they wanted a reformed Europe. So when he came back, I just think he thought it wasn't enough. But also, with regards to the point you made about him saying maybe they will then go back and have another, have another decision or change, maybe some more concessions. I do wonder sometimes, though. I know at the moment it's probably, genuinely true that they don't want to say you get a second chance. But maybe it's a bit like the Greece thing where, we kept being told last year that, if they don't pay this by this deadline, that's it. The Greece will be thrown out and the EU will collapse, and then the euro will collapse. And that never did happen because they always managed to go back to the tables and start talking. And I do wonder, though, if that might happen. If we do.
Well,
let's put that tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, Matthew, that the Danes voted no to the Maastricht Treaty. They were given some more concessions. They then voted for it. Twice the Irish have voted against European treaties and been forced to vote again. I do not want a second referendum. I want one referendum. I want to say goodbye to political union, and I want the Prime Minister the very next day to invoke Article 50 of the treaty, which is the mechanism by which we get out. My one concern is I so distrust our politicians in Westminster that even if we do vote to leave, they will do all they can not to carry out the will of the people.
How would they do that, Mr. Farage?
Just by ignoring us. By basically going for another renegotiation and attempting to give us another referendum. But I will say this, if they do that to us, you will see the biggest protest march through London that you have ever seen. So we can win this referendum, but we then have a battle to make sure that Parliament does its job.
You'd organise that march, or you'd help organise that march?
I'll be there at the front.
You'd be at the front.
Yeah,
now, I can share. Thank you for the call, Matthew. Let me share something with the listeners. 2 weeks ago, Phone Farage came from Brussels, as you recall, Mr. Farage. And the night before, you and I shared a glass of Tizer, and you expressed to me your confidence that Boris Johnson would be a Brexiter.
Yeah, I did.
How did you know?
Instinct. and perhaps if I'm being a touch cynical, if you look at the Conservative associations around the country, they are now strongly, strongly Eurosceptic. And if you believe that Tory succession is a battle between Boris and George Osborne, Boris is now firmly on the side of the majority of Conservative activists. So you could argue, whichever way the referendum goes, he has got the heart of the party out there in the country behind him. So perhaps it's no coincidence that this week, Call Me Dave has announced that he wants to abolish the 650 constituency associations and lump them into big groups. So I think that was the real reason. I just thought, he really embeds himself with Tory activists and Tory donors.
And are you talking with him regularly? Have you spoken to him since his decision?
I haven't, no. I've been in touch with him, and I said I'd like to meet him and talk to him. We haven't done that yet, but as I say, I'm encouraged because he started off, it was very wobbly to begin with, but he's now making all the right arguments, and he's a massive asset to our side of the argument.
We must move on.
We do.
Farage.
We go to Braintree in Essex, and to Sarah. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. I'd like to ask you, how do you see the UK, God forbid, if we don't vote to leave the EU in June, in, say, 10, 15 years' time? What will it look like? How would it have changed, if at all, in your opinion?
Well, the population will be over 70 million. Your access to primary schools and healthcare, let alone driving up the M6 or around the M25, will be far worse, Sarah, than it is now. And I've no doubt our contributions to this club will have gone up. And we'll find ourselves increasingly being left behind a world that is modernising and changing and moving forwards. And these ludicrous economic arguments about Europe as if it was the economic powerhouse of the world. It is not. It diminishes every single year that goes by relative to the rest of the world. And in so many ways, this referendum is about saying no to a system of government that is undemocratic, an organisation that's failing, with a currency that clearly can't survive in the long term, and a migrant crisis that actually threatens to tear the whole thing apart anyway. So we're saying goodbye to failure, and let's start to embrace the rest of the world. I would be very depressed, Sarah, if we vote to remain.
Me too, yeah.
And really, what this really comes down to, I mean, goodness me, I got into politics because I didn't trust our politicians. I now despise them. I mean, listening to the lies and the arguments that have been made over the course of the last week. If we vote to leave, everybody in Spain will be rounded up and put on trains and sent back to Britain. Millions of jobs will be lost. I mean, this sort of apocalyptic vision that we're getting from Cameron and the others. I mean, the only thing they haven't yet told us, which they may well, I suppose, at some point, is that if we vote to leave, a plague of locusts will descend upon the country. I mean, it's just extraordinary. But I think, Sarah, this is what I think. I think Cameron thought his deal would go down better than it did, and it was basically rubbish by everybody. I don't for a moment think Cameron thought that Gove and Boris would back leave. I don't for a moment think Cameron thought 140 Conservative backbenchers would support leave. And I think what the government have done this week, they've gone into full panic mode. They've had, letters from big businesses and all the rest of it. They've used all the things they should have used in the last fortnight of the campaign. So effectively, they fired all their bullets. There is nothing left. And from my perspective, Sarah, I'm pleased, because if they go on making these apocalyptic visions for us, I think in the end, the British public will say, cry wolf.
And one thing you haven't even mentioned, actually, how Britain might look. Do you think there's a real possibility that should Britain stay in the EU, Turkey will eventually become a member of the EU, and what that might mean for Britain?
There is a Turkish summit on Monday, taking place in Brussels, and Angela Merkel made it clear about 3 months ago that she wants Turkey to be a member of the European Union within 5 years. Something, by the way, that the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, has been fanatically in favour of since 2005. So isn't that wonderful, everybody? A country, 97% of which is in Asia, not Europe, is coming into our political union. A country whose living standards are even poorer on average than Romania and Bulgaria. A country with a population of 77 million and growing very rapidly. And we are, within a few years, going to go into a system where every single one of them, if they wish, can come to the United Kingdom. It is bonkers.
Sarah, thank you. Nigel, where do we go? Nigel Farage, where do we go?
We're going to Chris in Hastings. Chris, good morning.
Oh, good morning, gents. I'm losing my voice, so I hope it holds.
Okay.
Why do you think the French allowed thousands of people to build up in Calais, and they could have sorted it out when they were a couple of hundred? And what do you think the French could do to us if we decided to leave the European Union? And can I just pick up on something you've just said about in a few years' time we'll be 70 million? We are already 70 million.
I think
We've got
yeah.
65 million people and 7 million children. So that is over 70 million already.
Well, Chris, I think whatever the official figures are for population in this country, I'm beginning to think that actually we're being willfully lied to, because we get the official net migration statistics every year, and yet when you compare the numbers of people who supposedly have come in from the European Union to the number of national insurance numbers that have been issued, there is quite a wide disparity. And by the way, can I say, Chris, you living in Hastings, where we have what's left of the largest beach launching fishing fleet in the country, where they push the boats down the shingle and winch them back up again. And when we leave the European Union, Hastings will see more boats, more people employed, more fish being sold in that market when we take back, rightfully, our territorial waters. Now, Calais, Folkestone. The Prime Minister tells us that if we leave the European Union, the British border will move back to Dover and Folkestone, and there'll be vast encampments in Kent. Oh, really? Is that right? So you get into Britain and you decide, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll set up a camp here. Of course you wouldn't. You'd disperse. I mean, you'd be out, faster than a dose of Epsom salts. I mean, it's just crackers. The French and the British have a bilateral treaty on borders. If the French reneged on that, then very simply, what would happen, Chris, is people would get to Dover and be told, you have no right to come to this country, and be sent straight back to France. It is...
But they would physically be on British soil, wouldn't they, as opposed to being stopped at the Calais ports, where the UK Border Force are currently, Mr. Farage?
Well, there are 200 countries in the world, Nick, that have borders, whether it's at a river crossing or a sea crossing or a mountain range or whatever it is. There are 200 countries in the world where to get in, you've got to show somebody a passport and probably an address that you're going to, a reason for coming, and to tell people your length of stay. I've no reason to think that the French will change this treaty, because in fact for the French...
Weren't they hinting that yesterday as part of the Amiens summit?
Well, of course, because it's a big mates club, isn't it? Every politician in the world will line up and support Dave and say we must stay part of this European Union, including, of course, Barack Obama and the Chinese Premier. So, in a real sense, this referendum is basically people versus the politicians.
Some of my listeners in the first hour of the show, Mr. Farage, expressed a degree of upset that the Prime Minister was stood alongside Francois Hollande on stage yesterday as he, in a way, almost threatened and bullied the UK, and the Prime Minister just stood complicitly by his side. How did you react?
Oh, well, the Prime Minister clearly doesn't believe in Britain at all, doesn't think we're good enough to make our own trade deals, doesn't think we're good enough to make our own laws, doesn't think we're capable of looking after our own border if it was to come back to Dover or to Folkestone. So the ruder everybody is about Britain, the better that is for the British Prime Minister. He wants us to think that we're pitiful, weak and useless, and that we have to be governed by a bunch of old men based in Brussels. Nick, I said earlier in this show, I'm utterly contemptuous of these people. They are basically trying to keep us in this political project by telling us how rubbish and how bad we are. Well, to hell with that. We may not be perfect, but we are capable of standing on our own 2 feet and negotiating our way in the world. I mean, what was he said the other day? Oh, it would take us 10 years. 10 years, Dave said, it would take us to negotiate new trade deals. When the Australians negotiated a trade deal with America, they did it in 10 months. Are you saying we're that much worse than Australia? Well, maybe, Mr. Cameron, with you in charge, we are. But if we get out of this European Union, get a new Prime Minister, get some belief in our country back, we can do whatever we want.
Let's do some emails just before we move on in the calls. Graham in Bushy. Jeremy Corbyn is happy to share the platform with Hamas, Hezbollah, the IRA and other extremists, but not David Cameron on the EU. Does Nigel Farage find that strange?
Well, actually, it's not just Corbyn. Hilary Benn. Everyone talks about the splits in the Leave camp. Well, what about the splits in the Remain camp? Nicola Sturgeon, who supports staying in, has told the Prime Minister, please don't come north of the border. And Hilary Benn has said he won't share a platform with anybody. So it is quite extraordinary. I think what's more interesting about Corbyn is not who he'll share a platform with in this referendum. It's the fact that he's completely and totally and utterly AWOL. He's not to be seen. And in Prime Minister's questions, when Cameron had come back with that deal, all Corbyn was asking about was cancer care in the NHS. Now, important though cancer care in the NHS is, he clearly does not want to engage with this debate. And so Labour have a leader in the most important referendum in our history who clearly doesn't believe in his own party's position.
You talk about people not wanting to share stages, but Boris Johnson doesn't want to share a stage with George Galloway. How much of how much impact do you think George Galloway might have now in your campaign?
Well, I hope that George is going to have a huge impact. He's the only politician that I know on the Eurosceptic side of the argument that speaks to a large section of the Muslim community in this country. He's the only one.
Isn't he a turn-off as much as he's a turn-on, Mr Farage?
Well, if you support the Remain side, Tony Blair supports them. So is that going to put people off from voting? No, of course it's not. To win a referendum, what you have to do is bring people together from across the political spectrum because they all appeal to different audiences. Look, Nick, in 2008, I went to Dublin in the referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, and I shared a platform with Sinn Féin. I never thought I'd do that. And I never thought I'd share a platform with George Galloway. I never thought I'd share a platform with half these people. But, to me, this question of whether we govern our own country is more important than what divides us. More important than George has said some appalling things about me over the last few years, but I'm prepared to bury that in the interest of winning this referendum.
Let's get back to the cause.
We do, and we go to Amber in Ealing. Good morning.
Hello, Nick. Hello, Nigel.
Hi.
My question is to do with banning tackling in schools when they play rugby. My brother played a lot of rugby during his high school career and suffered a lot of serious injuries, several, and a collision that could have been fatal as well. So I feel quite strongly about this, but I just wanted to know what your stance is on this.
You are aware of this story, or do you need us?
Yes,
no,
I am.
I am.
Well, Amber, I went to a big rugby school.
Oh my God, you did, of
course.
Yeah. Can I tell everybody, you went to Dulwich College, which is a powerhouse.
Oh, yeah.
Andrew Sheridan, people like that went through Dulwich.
I think we've had 7 internationals in the last 10, 12 years that
phenomenal.
went to Dulwich, and I think there's
I think some of my teeth are still lying there. I played against them from high school.
I think the National Schoolboys Championships, we've been in the finals for the last 3 years.
Phenomenal school.
So, Amber, I was brought up playing rugby, and it was compulsory all the way through to the 6th form. So even at 18, you still had to play rugby. I have to confess, I wasn't that great at rugby. I was fine at hockey and cricket and golf and stuff like that. Amber, as parents,
yeah,
we worry about our kids. My youngest boy loved rugby. He played rugby at school, and after school, he joined Gravesend Rugby Club and turned out regularly for them. He's not a particularly big lad. And I can remember in one season, he had severe concussion, then he broke a collarbone. The year after that, he broke an ankle. And aged about 22, he gave up rugby. And I was thrilled that he'd given up rugby because he kept getting...
I had to pay my brother to stop playing rugby.
Because he kept getting hurt. But, I think we can insulate and isolate and wrap people up in cotton wool too much. Do we want our kids playing contact sports? Do we want our kids to be taught how to go hill walking or mountain climbing? And if we do those things, we have to accept that there is a degree of risk. So despite my own feelings about the game as a parent, I think schools, under correct supervision and discipline, should continue to play rugby and should continue to tackle.
Quick question, Amber, how much did it cost you to pay for your brother to stop playing rugby, as you've just revealed?
I offered him £3,000. Where I was going to get the money, I was going to worry about.
But he's okay, is he? I mean, obviously he's got a few bumps and bruises and not...
Well, yes, he's fine now, and thank goodness his job does not allow him the time to play rugby anymore.
Okay.
But I just think that, the skills that rugby teaches you, and I do understand it does, give a lot of life skills to these children that play. And I think that they can attain these skills elsewhere.
I think that's very true, but Nigel Farage, you'll know how happy I was when my 2 sons went to the school the other side of Dulwich, which is a football school. You know the one I'm talking about. I was quite relieved about that. Amber, good luck to your brother, good luck to you. We move on, Nigel Farage.
We do. We go to Robin in Birmingham. Good morning, Robin.
Good morning, guys. Nigel, I had a question about TTIP. I was having one of those conversations with somebody, and it sort of went, why does the government want to come out, want to stay in the EU, when obviously it's clearly not good for us. And they all kind of went, it's the TTIP. They needed to dismantle the welfare state. Without it, they can't do it. And I sort of nodded wisely, but quite frankly, I have tried to get my head around TTIP, and I don't really understand what it all means.
Mr. Farage has some views on this, I sense.
Right, OK, Robin, I'm going to try and do this for all the listeners as quickly and simply as I can. The TTIP, which I know most of you have never heard of, but you will during the course of this referendum. It's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Deal. It is a proposed deal between the European Union and the United States of America. It presents itself as being a trade deal, a means of reducing tariff barriers, which overall I, of course, have no problem with at all. But what it does, Robin, is it allows the giant corporates to have power. Firstly, if there are any disputes within this system, there is a disputes mechanism that goes above the British Parliament and above the British Court. But what it also does, and there is significant legal opinion on this, it would allow giant American corporations to bid for contracts within the National Health Service. And there are many people that fear that actually this could be the privatisation of the National Health Service through the back door. And so the trade union movement in Britain, who've been pretty uncritical of the EU for the last 25 years or so, are suddenly up in arms about this. And I even heard rumours, Robin, that on May Day this year in Trafalgar Square, there may well be a big anti-TTIP trade union demonstration. If Britain was an independent country, I would want a free trade deal with America. But I'd want one that just, removes barriers to trade. I wouldn't want one that handed massive power to giant corporations and had a dispute system that went above our own legal system. Robin, I hope that makes sense to you.
Let's get Robin back in.
That's cleared it up. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you very
okay,
much.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's move.
A satisfied customer.
I tell you what, you should go into journalism. You could sub the Telegraph down to one page. We move on.
We do. We're going to Pimlico and we're talking to Jill. Hello.
Hi, morning. Just want to know what the various Leave groups can do about the overwhelming influence that Goldman Sachs seem to have with the pro-EU campaign. I mean, they've already put strategic people in place like Carney and Draghi. They've got this platform for issuing the biased opinion. Plus, they've dumped a load of money for the EU campaign to remain. And I wonder what can be done about that. That seems insurmountable.
Great system, isn't it? So the politicians change the rules that the banking industry had, certainly in America, for nearly 80 years. They allow the banks to get into desperate trouble. They then use our money to bail the banks out, who then in turn use their money to try and tell us what to think and how to vote. It stinks, Jill, doesn't it? It absolutely stinks. And it is this sort of unholy...
Hang on, let's just get Jill back in. Jill, just say again, Jill.
I'm sorry. We had all this business with the banksters and everyone was up in arms. Why are we not seeing that back again as an antidote? I mean, that's exactly what's going on. So who's in charge of that?
Let's bring Ms Farage back in.
Jill, it's this unholy trinity of big banks, big companies and big politics. And that is what is driving this whole campaign. But to be fair to them, let's recognise that for Goldman Sachs and people like that, the European Union is one of the best things that ever happened. Why? Because the system of lawmaking in Brussels and within the EU is it's the unelected commission that have the sole right to propose legislation or the change in legislation. So if you're a big company, you have a full-time lobbying office in Brussels. You take out the relevant departments for breakfast, lunch and dinner and play golf at the Royal Waterloo Golf Club on a Sunday morning. And you as a big company actually get the chance to write the rules that regulate your business. And the bigger you are, the more rules you create, the more you put out of business your small and medium-sized competitors. And that is why big business loves this Brussels project. It is good for big business, but it's very bad for small business, and it's bad for workers. And I was amused this week that Lord Rose, who's been hibernating, I think, for most of the winter, but he's now, now that it's March, he's woken up, and he appeared before the House of Commons Select Committee. And when he was asked the question, if we left the EU, would workers' wages rise? He said yes. But I don't think that would be a good thing. And that tells you, I think, Jill, all you need to know about the attitudes of big banks and big business.
We're coming to the last. Thank you for your call, Joe. We're coming to the last couple of minutes. Nigel Farage, I wonder if I can get your comment on an email that was leaked to The Guardian from a gentleman called Dominic Cummings that goes as follows. Hello, I'm Campaign Director of Vote Leave. We will be the official Leave campaign in the imminent referendum. We need an agency to help us spend £7 million. If interested, could we talk ASAP? We have Boris and Michael Gove on board, plus Labour and business people. That ends the note. So the decision has been made, has it not?
No, it hasn't, but that's just the arrogance that you expect from people that will live and work and breathe inside the Westminster bubble. There is this Vote Leave group run by him who believe that, of divine right, the Electoral Commission will choose them to run the Leave campaign, but they are almost completely dominated by Conservatives, and they seem to spend their entire day inside and lives inside SW1. And there's another group called Go, who tomorrow have got over 500 street stalls out across the United Kingdom.
This is one you're working very hard with.
And we hope next Saturday there could be 1,000 street stalls out across the country. And in that, we've got people like Kate Hoey, who I'm sharing a platform with tonight from Labour. We've got Conservatives like Peter Bone. We've got UKIP. We've got, yes, George Galloway. Commentators like Simon Heffer. We are a cross-party group, and we're out there campaigning on the ground. And we are competing for the designation against Mr. Cummings, whose arrogance, I think, in that email, really beggars belief.
Just before you take your final question, listen to LBC 929 News breaking at this time. Facebook has just announced it will stop routing sales from major UK customers through Ireland. It's a move which is almost certainly resulting in a large increase in the amount of tax it pays in Britain. Facebook paid £4,327 in corporation tax in the UK in 2014. Even I pay more than that. I'm sure there'll be more details in the next LBC bulletin.
Well, of course, because we're part of the European Union and the European Economic Area, companies are allowed to pay corporation tax wherever they want, right across.
So would all of this end if Britain was to come out of the EU, Chancellor Osborne or whoever it was?
If we come out of the EU, we get back tax sovereignty. We could
on Googles and Facebooks.
Yeah, and we could do what the Americans
Amazons.
do. And we could demand that people pay tax where they actually make the revenue.
I think that would
there we
really
are.
hit a chord with my listener. Have we got time? Can we do one final?
We have
would you do
got
it for me?
time for Kevin, who's somewhere in Spain, south of Spain, I suspect, Kevin.
Yes, I'm in Valencia. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
As you're probably aware, over here, the expats, we've got the rights for a postal vote.
Yes.
And as I'm talking to other expats, as I'm meeting them in bars and so on and so forth.
Tough old life.
Someone's got to do it, Mr. Farage.
Go on, sorry.
The questions that are coming up that are putting a lot of people off of voting to come out are these. And no one can give us a definitive answer, so I'm hoping that you can. There's 3 points. The first one is reciprocal health care. If we leave the EU, will we still be entitled to that health care for free, or will we have to start taking out private health insurance? The next one was pensions. At the moment, the pensions are index-linked. If we come out of the EU, will we lose the index-linked part of the pension? And the other one, which is very strange, is people that are actually working here are very frightened that if we come out of Spain, we'll now need to get visas or work permits to be able to still work in Spain.
Yeah, OK.
These are important questions.
Right,
Glad
Kevin,
we take the call, Mr. Farage.
Now, what the government have been telling you this week is that if you're British and you live in Spain, you'll be rounded up at the point of a machine gun, loaded onto trains, and sent back to the United Kingdom. What total and utter baloney. The point is, Kevin, that much of the south of Spain's economy wouldn't survive without the Brits, because the Brits that are there are not taking out of Spain, they're spending their pensions, or in many cases they're running companies and employing people. So as far as health is concerned, and as far as pensions are concerned, they are decisions for the UK government. So, if you're getting health care, Kevin, in Spain, if you were living in England, they'd be providing you with the same health care anyway, all right? So there's nothing to worry about on that score. On pensions, an index...
So he'll still have his health care paid for?
Of course, because the British government will pay for it. Right. That's the point. On pensions, well, again, that is entirely up to the UK government and nothing to do with the European Union at all. Now, working, if somebody goes to Spain and is employed by somebody, we would expect somebody from Spain coming to Britain to have a work permit. And so you will, as a British person, probably have to get a work permit to work in Spain. But, Kevin, don't worry about that, because all over the world, people move around countries and work in different countries, and they do it on a work permit system. So that is the one inconvenience.
Let me just ask you this, Kevin.
Yeah.
If I was to ask you to get 10 of your colleagues together over a plate of chorizo and patatas fritas and a bottle of Rioja, of those 10, just broadly speaking, those who aren't in jail, I'm only kidding, of those 10, who's out, who's in? Which way would it come down?
At the moment, they're very, very worried about reciprocal healthcare and the pensions not being index-linked. So I would say 90% would vote to stay in.
Right. Have yourself a good weekend. Quick response to that, Nigel.
Yeah,
Farage.
Kevin, I must get down to Valencia and come into that bar with you and try and persuade your mates, all right?
I feel a trip coming on. Nigel Farage, thank you. Thank you very much for coming here and appearing in Phone Farage here on LBC, where news is next with Lisa Aziz.
UKIP leader Nigel Farage has told LBC he believes the government's gone into full panic mode over the EU referendum. He's accused the Leave campaign of making false apocalypse